So ever since SN9 went up in a blaze of glory, just about everybody associated with SpaceX or space enthusiasm, that sort of thing, has been asking, when are we going to see SN10? Well, unfortunately, probably not for a little while. First of all, of course, SpaceX needs to determine exactly what went wrong with the landing this time, since it was something different than the previous mishap. But on top of that, as I mentioned in my previous video, the FAA has launched another investigation. Quote, although this was an uncrewed test flight, the investigation will identify the root cause of today's mishap and possible opportunities to enhance safety as the program develops, unquote. And who knows how long that's going to take. And just so you know, the FAA defines a mishap as, quote, a launch or re-entry accident, launch or re-entry incident, launch site accident, failure to complete a launch or re-entry as planned, or an unplanned event or series of events resulting in up to $25,000 worth of damage, a fatality, or a serious injury. But in the face of this disappointment, something rather positive happened when it comes to the Artemis program. And I'm not talking at all about the infamous green run and everything that went wrong with that. And let's hope that the next green run goes very well, because I called for one and thank God NASA's actually doing it. Not to say that they're influenced by me at all, but they are making the right decision. But the green run is not the good news. The good news is that previously Congress was only providing enough funding for SLS rockets. In other words, the ability to get to the moon or orbit the moon, but not to land on it. The HLS system, which required billions of dollars to complete, received substantially less than $1 billion of funding from Congress, which practically crippled the program. And now there's been a turnaround. In a letter to the White House, 11 Democratic senators encouraged President Joe Biden to continue with Artemis as is, which comes as a complete shock to a lot of people, given the fact that about a year ago, the House came up with infamous Initiative 5666, and yes, that's what it was called, that would offer maybe a few token missions to the moon, focus on Mars, eliminate the lunar gateway, and get this, put the entire project in the hands of Boeing, which might put us on Mars by the 31st century. Given that virtually every Republican senator supports Artemis as is, and on top of that, the White House made a public statement saying that they intend to push forward with Artemis without any changes, this actually gives Artemis new life. When everyone was thinking that Joe Biden was going to cut back on funding and push the date up significantly, we still have a chance of getting to the moon by 2024. And there's some very good reasons for this, and a lot of new developments with the human landing system that impacts SpaceX and everybody else. And we're going to cover all of these things in just a few minutes. Hello once again, and welcome to another episode of The Angry Astronaut. So we've all been talking about SN9. That's what's been on everybody's mind, including my own, and of course I released an analysis of the flight a day after it happened, and a lot of people released something about it a lot sooner than I did. But even though all of us are very focused on this, there's a lot of other things happening, obviously, in the world of space flight. We're about to have probes land on the surface of Mars again for the first time in years. At the same time, we have multiple nations that are going to be participating in this. On top of that, obviously, we have Artemis, and what a bunch of things happening as far as all of that is concerned. And SpaceX, of course, is right in the thick of things. As a matter of fact, they've been awarded contract after contract associated with Artemis, mostly in terms of landing preliminary probes and rovers on the surface of the moon to determine as much information as possible before we put human beings there. And then obviously we have the resupply missions, those sorts of things. But then we have the Lunar Starship, something that people love to talk about. We love to talk about it as if it's something that's definitely going to happen. But is it going to happen? It is a very expensive project. It's a completely different version of the Starship, and we have yet to see a prototype of it, unlike all the SN versions we've seen thus far. Now, as I'm going to show you in the video, there is a mock-up in process, it would appear, at Boca Chica, and perhaps they're going to try to make that fly between now and the end of April. And I would actually give SpaceX a pretty good chance of being able to complete at least a short 150-meter flight, given the fact that they've been able to do that already with the Starship essentially going straight up and coming straight back down, which is a realistic, or a reasonable rather, simulation of what's going to be happening on the moon. So they've got that. But there's a whole lot of other things involved in a human landing system besides the vehicle itself. And their competitors, the national team and Dynetics, have actually been doing a lot of things that haven't been getting a lot of press. A lot of tests, a lot of demonstrations to NASA to see to it that they're going to win this bid. And even though a lot of people talk as if it's going to be the national team and SpaceX, or, SpaceX alone, SpaceX is going to be involved in some way, unfortunately, I think that because of the large number of things that have yet to be demonstrated by SpaceX in terms of the Lunar Starship, they could be looking at an early elimination from this competition. And that would be a very bad thing, because it puts the national team, which I have said over and over again, is a wasteful landing system and a dangerous landing system. And it puts them in the driver's seat, and that's something that we definitely don't need. But fortunately, there's another player called Dynetics, and they've been doing an awful lot too. So I hope I'm not going to get a whole lot of SpaceX fans angry at me, because I probably did that already with my last video, but I'm going as honestly as I possibly can with the information that I've been able to gather to cover the progress that SpaceX, the national team, and Dynetics have made on their landing systems and how likely they are to win. Oh yeah. And of course, the most important thing is the fact that the Democrats seem to have come out in support of Artemis against all expectations, both the Biden administration and quite a number of Democratic senators. So we're going to cover that as well right now. This letter came as a great surprise to a number of people, simply because when the Democrats took over the government, it was assumed that the new focus would be on things like climate change. However, I was not terribly surprised, because going to the moon is something that is very politically expedient for Republicans and Democrats. Okay, well, maybe I was a little bit surprised because the government seldom does things that make sense, politically or otherwise, but the main signer of this letter was Senator Patty Murray, who you're looking at right now from Washington, and her state is home to Blue Origin. However, co-signers of this bill were Michael Bennett and John Hickenlooper of Colorado, which are home to Lockheed Martin, also part of the Blue Origin team, but also of Maxar, Sierra Nevada Corporation, and ULA, who are part of the Dynetics team. And by the way, props to my home state of Colorado. Way to go, guys. But they weren't the only ones to sign this, not even close. Other signers were Ben Cardin of Maryland, Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin, Gary Peters of Michigan, Tim Kaine of Virginia, Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada, and Jackie Rosen of Nevada. The letter pointed out that $1.5 billion have already been invested in HLS, and they said, quote, "We recommend robust funding in fiscal year 2022 for the continuation of the HLS program and the timely selection of companies to advance to the next stage of development and demonstration contracts." Now, they didn't mention an exact number, but they did ask for all necessary funding for HLS. However, neither senator from California, where SpaceX is, signed the letter. However, just on cue, Jen Psaki, who's the press secretary for the White House, said, quote, "Through the Artemis program, the United States government will work with industry and international partners to send astronauts to the surface of the moon, another man and a woman to the moon, which is very exciting, conduct new and exciting science, prepare for future missions to Mars, and demonstrate America's values." Now, this move by the White House makes all kinds of political sense. Not only does it provide a lot of jobs in a variety of states, it also gives Biden the opportunity to shake the hand of the first woman who sets foot on the moon. And it also gives Republicans the opportunity to take credit for the whole thing because it was Pence and Trump who started the Artemis program in the first place. What does all of this mean to SpaceX and the Lunar Starship? Well, to their credit, they seem to be working on a mock-up for the Lunar Starship, as this nose cone out at Boca Chica seems to indicate. However, in my opinion, they're going to make a flying version before the April decision, which means they'd better move very quickly. However, SpaceX is pretty good at moving quickly. And as much as we'd like to think that SN8 and SN9 have already been examples of what SpaceX can do with the Lunar Starship, they're just not. They differ from an engineering perspective and a lot of other ways from the Lunar Starship, but that's actually kind of a good thing because the Lunar Starship lands differently. It lands upright. And as SpaceX has already demonstrated, they're very good at landing things upright. As a matter of fact, they've been fairly perfect at it. So once they assemble this Lunar Starship mock-up, if they decide to make it fly, it's probably going to be pretty impressive. And for SpaceX fans, let's hope so, because they're up against some very strong competition. And to give you an example of what kind of competition this amounts to, I'm going to talk about Dynetics simply because they're the one that I'm the most familiar with. As of January 6, 2021, Dynetics was performing tests of its main engines simultaneously at its propulsion test site and at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, both in Huntsville, Alabama. And by the way, these things also run off of Methalox fuel, but way less Methalox fuel than the Lunar Starship does. They're also testing their reaction control thrusters, of course, but on top of that, Draper Laboratory is providing them with software, which includes a human-in-the-loop testing of the Dynetics Human Landing System guidance and its navigation and control software. On top of that, the Sierra Nevada Corporation completed a hardware test article which essentially allows NASA astronauts to experiment with the control systems on the lander and also a virtual reality simulator to evaluate how future crews would view the lunar surface and the landing site on approach. And on top of that, Houston-based Oceaneering has a system for astronaut training, since a lot of that is done in the water, and they also, and this is a very exciting thing, have completed dust mitigation technology demonstrations using something called the Debris Vacuum Assembly, or DEVA hardware. And additional dust mitigation technology demonstrations are ongoing at the NASA's Kennedy Space Center. And it just keeps going. The Paragon Space Development Corporation has reached an Environmental Control Life Support System preliminary design review within 7 months of program kickoff. And the component tests of this life support system have already been conducted at NASA's Glenn Research Station. And then Maxar Technologies has completed preliminary designs for many of the Dynetics Human Landing System's major subsystems like the power, the avionics, communications, thermal control subsystems, all sorts of things already done. Plus, they've done detailed analyses on a wide variety of phenomena, such as the interaction of main engine exhaust plumes with the lunar regolith, which a lot of people have expressed concern about, but they're on top of it. But here's the main problem of Lunar Starship versus any of the smaller lunar landers: the amount of delta V required to get to the moon and back to low Earth orbit. I'm not going to have you strain your eyes, but it's about 6.5 kilometers per second, or 13 kilometers per second if you double that figure. And you have to, because you can't manufacture methylox fuel on the moon. There just aren't the correct chemicals to do so like you have on Mars. As a result, it's just not practical to use the Lunar Starship as a lunar lander, although it could be used as a tanker in lunar orbit, which would require a lot less delta V, and the Dynetics lander could definitely benefit from that. But am I suggesting that the Lunar Starship is doomed? Absolutely not. As I have suggested in the Dear Moon video that I released, it could definitely be used for that. In addition to that, it could also be used executing a free return trajectory to drop very heavy payloads down onto the lunar surface, utilizing minimal fuel in the process. On top of that, it could also be used to establish initial bases on the moon, the beginnings of Moon Base Alpha, as Elon suggested. The fact that Dynetics, and by the way, Blue Origin's done a lot of stuff already too, have done all this work already, and SpaceX has been focusing mostly on Starship and also on Starlink and not so much on this bid, suggests to me that Elon is not that concerned about it. He doesn't want to use Starship as a lunar lander. He just wanted to throw a bid out there. He got some money out of the deal, which was a help, and also NASA started to take Starship a lot more seriously. So although we may not realize our dream of Lunar Starship becoming the lunar lander of the future, it will definitely serve a purpose. And perhaps more importantly, because of this surprise announcement or this letter from Democratic senators and the support of Artemis as stated by the White House, we may see man's return to the moon by 2024, as we've been hoping so desperately for. Let's certainly hope so, because this would benefit everyone. So I think we've come to a point now where some of you folks may be thinking that I am not a SpaceX supporter at all. I find all kinds of problems, all kinds of things to criticize, but I want to assure you completely and honestly that I am a huge supporter of SpaceX. I believe in what Elon wants to do. I want us to become a multiplanetary species. I want us to have a self-sustaining colony on Mars. I want us to explore the solar system with a reusable spacecraft with a low per kilogram cost that makes spaceflight affordable for everybody, which is the Starship. I want all of these things, but I also want what's going to be best and what's going to be most successful for any given project. And I'm sorry, the Lunar Starship, as far as a lander is concerned, is not the most economical or efficient solution. As you saw from the video, I gave a lot of reasons. It just isn't for the purposes of Artemis. And I think that NASA is going to bear that out in their decision at the end of April. I hope they keep the Starship. I hope they keep the Starship for purposes of using it as a refueling station, as I've said a number of times in the past. I think if it mirrors the Lunar Gateway's rectilinear halo orbit and serves as a station for the Dynetics lander to give it the fuel it needs for multiple visits to the moon, I think it will serve an admirable purpose in that regard. And I also think for the long run, the Starship will also serve very, very useful purposes for establishing bases and that sort of thing. But in terms of a human landing system designed to scout the surface of the moon to determine the best places for us to build a base, it's just not the right vehicle for the job. Having said all of that, anybody who supports Blue Origin, assuming they even click on my videos anymore, must hate me at this point, and I can't really blame you. But at the same time, I want to also assure you, I don't have a grudge against Blue Origin. I really don't. I wish there were things that I could say that would be positive, but this lander of theirs is putting Artemis in danger. It's expensive. 2/3 of it is not reusable and therefore is going to require not only replacement modules, but also flights to bring those modules to the Lunar Gateway. All of that is going to involve extra money on top of the $1 to $2 billion per launch that the SLS is going to represent. That's a lot of cash and something that ultimately Congress may decide isn't worth it, and they may just simply cut it. And we dare not risk that. We need a reusable, affordable ship, and that is the Dynetics ALPACA. It is the best solution for the job. But I wish Blue Origin the best of luck with the new Glenn and whatever they decide to do with that. I think that that is a rocket with promise once it finally gets done, and I hope they finally accomplish their task as far as that's concerned. And maybe Jeff Bezos stepping down from Amazon and publicly stating that he intends to take the reins at Blue Origin and take it where he wants it to go, that may make a world of difference. And if it does, I will be a very happy person, and I'll be releasing positive videos about Blue Origin. Promise, I will, once there's something positive to release as far as I'm concerned. But All of that having been said, the one thing that I am the happiest about is the fact that the new administration and the Democrats, at least in the Senate, seem to support Artemis and the HLS, and that is absolutely crucial. So let's hope that that goes forward. So if you like this content, you want to see more of it, it's all in the description. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. So until NASA makes their decision as to who is going to be taking astronauts to the surface of the moon, and let's hope that they choose wisely as opposed to who has the most powerful allies in Congress, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.